So, some key terminology you have to use around validation. It tends to be a little bit of alphabet soup. So you'll hear terms like IQ, OQ, PQ, SOC1, SOC2. What do these terms mean? Installation qualification is just simply confirming that the installation of the software is installed in a consistent, repeatable manner. So here's how I have seen over the last 9 years that I've been working with AX. Here's how I've seen AX installed. Okay, we start installing Windows. Whoops, I forgot to configure this. Whoops, I forgot to configure that. And then I get to the AOS server. Oh, I gotta set this parameter. Oops, I gotta set that parameter. Then I get to installing reporting services. Whoops, I gotta set that. It's no consistent process in a lot of cases. For installation qualification, that process has to be consistent. So that means you have to write it down. Remember, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. Operational qualification are test scripts that confirm the operation of the system. The functionality of the system is really what OQ tested. Performance qualification tests are conducted after the validation exercise, the initial validation exercise is complete. And what you're doing with performance qualification is you're really testing to make sure that the system conforms to several quality standard or performance standards. So for example, I set a standard that says a window shouldn't take any more than 5 seconds to open. So we have to confirm that the system meets these performance objectives. So that's what PQs are. Part 11, you'll hear this all the time. Here is what happened with Part 11, and I sat in on the initial GAMP committee. I used to be a part of GAMP, and I also sat in on the Parental Drug Association's review of Part 11 with the agency back in 1991 before it became a final rule. And here's what happened. The industry itself asked for Part 11, and now they're complaining violently about it because the FDA kind of gave them what they want, so be careful what you ask for. Basically, Part 11 came about because the industry wanted a way to present information to the FDA electronically because they were all using computerized systems. So they went to the agency and said, can we sign things electronically and submit it to you? Because by statute, they have to submit paper documents before Part 11, and they had to submit them in triplicate and sometimes 7 to 10 copies. So for example, a new drug application, you have to have 10 copies of that. And a new drug application, by the way, is over 1 million pages. So we're talking 10 million pages that they had to give to the FDA. So they said, can we sign electronically? And the FDA says, yes, of course we have to have a regulation around it. So they invented Part 11. And so Part 11 basically governs electronic records and signatures. So the first thing you need to know about Part 11 is it's not just about signatures. A lot of people think it's all about signing a document. No, there's an electronic records piece to this that you have to be very careful for. So in your systems in AX, AX has to comply with Part 11. So if you're ever selling into this industry, strongly recommend Google 21 CFR Part 11 final rule and pull the regulation down. The regulation itself is only 3 pages. Please ignore the first 36 pages because that's all preamble. That's how the Code of Federal Regulations work. There's a preamble section and then there's actually the law itself. The law is only 3 pages. So this is really good bathroom reading if you haven't read it before because you can finish it by the time you get out of the bathroom. But I would strongly suggest that you read Part 11 because your customers absolutely are going to ask you about this statute. And you have to be ready to do that. Standard operating procedures. You cannot validate a system without standard operating procedures. Here's how the FDA works. You first have to tell them what you're going to do, and then you have to prove that you did it. How do you prove what you were going to do? It's already written in your SOP. So every one of your customers has an SOP for validation that says, here's how validation works in company X. Every single customer has this. They have one for installation qualification, they have one for operational qualification. So the first thing I do when I go into a customer is I read the SOPs because I have to follow those. That's my governance for all of the validation process. So when you go into companies, it's very important for you to ask the customer, this is a qualifying question, do you have SOPs in place? Guaranteed, if you walk into a biotech company, the short answer is going to be no. When you walk into a biotech. Good manufacturing practice. 100% of the customers you're going to deal with in life science are subject to this. GMP 210-211 in Europe has an annex that's associated with GMPs, and then the Japan's Medicine Agency yet has another one. GMPs are around the world. They're kind of universal at this point in time. You're going to run into these, and AX has to comply. As a matter of fact, what do we actually validate in AX? It's mostly the GMP and quality functionality. I usually don't validate finance. I only have one customer in 9 years that asked me to validate the finance functionality explicitly, and they had a Sarbanes-Oxley issue. Most of the time, customers don't want you to do that. GAMP-5. This is the methodology that we use for validation. GAMP stands for Good Acceptable Manufacturing Practices. That's what that stands for. So here was the birth of GAMP. About maybe 15, 16 years ago, the entire world was doing validation differently. If you validated in Japan, you had to follow these rules. If you validated in the United States, you were subject to FDA. And if you validated in Europe, you were subject to EMEA. And everybody was doing something different. And so this GAMP consortium, and it's a consortium of worldwide companies came together and they said, let's harmonize once and for all what validation looks like at the end of the day. And that was the GAMP-5 standard. That was the GAMP standard. We're on version 5 of GAMP, so that's why it's called GAMP-5. So you're going to hear a term called predicate rule. It's a fancy-dancy term, and all it means is a law. That's like, now, why did they call it predicate rule? Go figure. This is life sciences, all right? But somebody thought that it was a good idea. It's anything that's in the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations is considered a predicate rule. Quality assurance is the group that has governance over validation. So if you're in a sales cycle, please don't alienate quality. These are the people who are actually going to approve this, and you want to make sure that you're talking to these guys. I was talking to one customer before, and it turns out that the partner was really kind of antagonizing quality, and quality is kind of the name of the game in life sciences. These are important people. And then lastly, change control. Every single thing that happens in a life sciences company is subject to change control, and all that means is when things change, you have to document the change, and there is a process. Change control is one of the GMP statutes, if you will, and it says that if I change a document, if I change a process, if I change anything, if I change a label, I have to now sign, document what the reason for the change is, who recommended the change, etc., and all of this has to be documented. The reason why this is important for Dynamics AX is you are going to be asked about the change control process, guaranteed in life sciences. So you have to understand what that is and what it's about.